Blood stained the birthing sheets as Calverton Welland pressed his calloused palm against his wife's cooling forehead, the infant's wails piercing through the howling Nebraska wind that rattled their cabin's shutters. 3 days of labor had ended. In triumph and tragedy his son lived, but Cordelia would never hold their child. "Hush now, little one," he whispered, lifting the squirming bundle with hands more accustomed to breaking wild horses than cradling newborns. The baby's cries intensified, tiny fists beating against the rough wool of Cal's work shirt. The cabin door burst open with a crash of wind and rain. Mordecai Grimsby, the town's notorious matchmaker, stood silhouetted against the lightning, his beaver-skin coat dripping puddles onto the pine floor. Behind him lurched Dr. Hensley, medical bag in hand, too late for everything that mattered. "Christ almighty, Welland," Grimsby boomed, shaking rain from his wild gray mane. "That child's been crying for near an hour. Half the valley can hear him." Cal turned his back to the intruders, bouncing the infant awkwardly. "Get out, Grimsby. This ain't the time for your meddling." But Grimsby had already spotted Cordelia's still form on the bed, her golden hair spread across the pillow like spun wheat. His calculating eyes swept from the dead woman to the fumbling father to the screaming child. "I told you 6 months past that you needed a wife," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Cordelia was too delicate for this frontier life, too refined for bearing children in a cabin 20 miles from nowhere. She was my wife." Cal roared, spinning around with such fury that the baby startled into momentary silence. "Don't you dare speak ill of her. I'm speaking truth, boy." Grimsby stepped closer, unfazed by Cal's rage. "That child needs milk, and you ain't got the equipment to provide it. Cordelia's sister in Philadelphia might take him, but by the time you get word east and back, he'll be in the ground beside his mother." The baby resumed crying, a desperate sound that seemed to claw at Cal's chest. He'd delivered countless foals and calves, had seen the panic in a mother's eyes when she couldn't feed her young. But this was different. This was his son, his blood, and he was failing him with every passing moment. Dr. Hensley finally spoke from his position by the door. "There's a wet nurse in Millbrook, but she's already feeding twins. Might take on one more for the right price." "Millbrook's a day's ride in good weather," Cal said, looking out at the storm. "He'll be dead before I can saddle a horse." Grimsby's weathered face split into what might have been a smile. "Not if you had a wife, Welland. A woman who could nurse him, raise him proper. I've got 3 prospects already lined up, good frontier stock, all of them. Hardy women who won't wilt at the first sign of hardship." Cal stared at the matchmaker, his grief and desperation warring with outrage. "My wife ain't been dead 3 hours, and you're already planning my next wedding?" "Your wife is dead," Grimsby said bluntly. "Your son is dying. Which matters more, your pride or his life?" The baby's cries grew weaker, more pitiful. Cal felt his resolve cracking like ice. In spring thaw, thunder crashed overhead as Cal paced the cabin's narrow confines, his son growing quieter with each passing minute, a silence more terrifying than the earlier screams. Grimsby watched from his position by the fire, patient as a vulture circling carrion. "Tell me about these women," Cal said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Grimsby's eyes gleamed. "First is Delphine Courtwright from Kansas. Lost her husband to consumption last winter, been working his claim alone ever since. Strong as an ox, that one. Delivered her own baby in a blizzard and walked 5 miles to town the next morning. She has a child? Had. Fever took him same time as her husband." Grimsby's voice carried no sentiment, just facts delivered like a livestock auction. "She's got milk but no baby. You've got a baby but no milk." "Mathematics, Welland." Cal stopped pacing. The logic was brutal but undeniable. What'd she want in return? Protection, security, A roof that ain't full of holes and land that ain't about to be claimed by creditors. Grimsby pulled out a tobacco pouch, began rolling a cigarette with steady fingers. Women like that don't expect love, just partnership. She'll nurse your boy, help work the ranch, give you more children if that's what you want. The baby whimpered, a sound so weak it barely carried across the room. Cal felt panic rising in his throat like bile. How fast can you get her here? Fast as telegraph wires can carry the message and a train can bring her west. 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather holds. He'll be dead in 3 days. Not necessarily. Dr. Hensley stepped forward, medical authority finally asserting itself. I can give you enough laudanum to keep him quiet, help him conserve strength. There's a goat farm 10 miles south Ingram's place. Goat's milk ain't ideal for a newborn, but it's better than nothing. Cal looked down at his son's face, already gaunt from hunger, skin taking on a grayish pallor that spoke of impending death. The child had Cordelia's delicate features, but Cal's. Dark hair, a perfect blend of two people who'd loved each other desperately for the brief time they'd had. What about the other 2 women? He asked, hating himself for the calculation in his voice. Temperance Blackthorne from Colorado Territory, widow with 2 young boys of her own. Practical as they come, can shoot, hunt, preserve meat, deliver. Babies. Built like she could wrestle a bear and win. Grimsby lit his cigarette, took a long drag. But she's got strong opinions about how things should be done. Might not take kindly to being bossed around. And the third? Serafina Crane from Oregon. Youngest of the lot, 22, maybe 23. Father died in a mining accident, left her with nothing but debts. She's educated, can read, and write better than most men, but she's also, Grimsby paused, choosing his words carefully, spirited. Got herself in trouble back home for speaking her mind too freely about women's rights and such nonsense. Cal felt his first spark of interest. Cordelia had been educated too, had taught school before their marriage. He'd loved listening to her. Read aloud in the evenings, her voice turning even the driest agricultural reports into poetry. What kind of trouble? The kind that gets a woman labeled a troublemaker. Town council suggested she might find better prospects elsewhere. Grimsby's. Grin turned predatory. Course, what they call troublesome, you might call useful. Smart woman who ain't afraid to speak up could be valuable out here. The baby's breathing had become shallow, irregular. Cal made his decision with the reckless desperation of a man watching his child die. Send for all 3. Grimsby's eyebrows shot up. All 3? Let them know the situation. First one here gets the job and the husband. Cal's voice turned hard as winter iron. But make it clear what this is. This ain't about romance or courtship. This is about survival. And if more than one shows up? Cal looked at his dying son, then at Cordelia's still form on the bed. Then I'll choose the one most likely to keep my boy alive. 2 days passed in a haze of sleepless vigilance and growing desperation. Cal had made the treacherous ride to Ingram's goat farm through mud that sucked at his horse's hooves like quicksand, returning with a mason jar of warm milk that the baby promptly vomited back up. Dr. Hensley's laudanum kept the infant quiet, but did nothing to address the fundamental problem. He was starving. Cal sat in his rocking chair. The same chair where Cordelia had spent countless evenings knitting tiny blankets and singing lullabies to her swelling belly. Now he held their son against his chest, feeling each shallow breath like a countdown to disaster. The baby had stopped crying altogether, lacking the strength for protest. Hoofbeats thundered up the muddy path to his cabin. Cal's head snapped up, hope and fear warring in his chest. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw a lone rider approaching. At dangerous speed, hunched low over a lathered horse that looked ready to collapse. The rider slid from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped. boots splashing through puddles as they ran toward the cabin. Cal caught a glimpse of dark hair whipping in the wind, a woman's figure in men's traveling clothes, before his door burst open without ceremony. "Where's the baby?" The voice was female but commanding, carrying an authority that brooked no argument. The woman who entered was tall and lean, with a kind of beauty that came from strength rather than delicacy-high cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Eyes the color of storm clouds, skin burnished by sun and weather. "You're Serafina Crane," Cal said, not making it a question. "I'm the woman who rode 4 days straight to save your child's life," she replied, already shrugging out of a rain-soaked coat. "Now where is he?" Cal lifted the baby from his chest, and Seraphine's expression softened slightly at the sight of the tiny wan face. She crossed to him in 3 quick strides, expert hands checking the infant's pulse, breathing, the color of his gums. "How long since he last kept anything down?" "Day and a half. Maybe longer." She cursed with a creativity that would have impressed a cavalry sergeant, then began unlacing her traveling dress with brisk efficiency. "Get me hot water and clean cloths. And for God's sake, stop staring and help me save your son." Cal found himself obeying without question, his natural inclination to command overridden by her sheer competence. When he returned from the kitchen, with supplies, she had settled into the rocking chair, the baby already latched and feeding eagerly. "Thank God," he breathed, feeling tears of relief threaten. "Don't thank him yet," Serafina said grimly. "He's weak, probably dehydrated. It'll take more than one feeding to get him out of danger." She looked up at Cal with those storm-gray eyes. Grimsby's telegram was sparse on details. "Tell me what happened." Cal found himself explaining the entire nightmare Cordelia's difficult pregnancy, the prolonged labor, her death moments after their son's birth. Serafina listened without interruption, occasionally adjusting the baby's position or stroking his dark hair with surprising tenderness. "You buried her already?" she asked when he finished. "Yesterday morning. Couldn't wait any longer in this heat." Serafina nodded. "What was her name?" "Cordelia. Cordelia Wellen. And the baby?" Cal realized with a shock that he hadn't even named his son yet, had been too focused on keeping him alive to consider what to call him. We hadn't decided." For the first time since her arrival, Seraphine's expression showed something approaching gentleness. "He looks like a Gabriel to me. Messenger of God, bringer of good news. He's certainly brought news that he intends to live." The baby had indeed grown stronger during the feeding, his color improving, tiny fists unclenching from their desperate grip. Cal felt something ease in his chest for the first time in days. "The other 2 women Grimsby contacted," he began, but Serafina cut him off with a sharp look. "What other women?" Cal explained about Delphine and Temperance, watched Seraphine's jaw tighten as he spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, Gabriel making contented suckling sounds in the sudden silence. "So I'm not your choice," she said finally. "I'm just the first to arrive." "That's right." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "Good. Then we understand each other perfectly." Gabriel had been feeding regularly for 36 hours, his color improving from gray to pink to healthy rose when the second rider appeared on Cal's property. This time it was a woman driving a weather-beaten wagon, 2 young boys visible on the seat beside her. Temperance Blackthorne looked exactly as Grimsby had described, built like she could wrestle a bear and win. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained the seams of her practical wool dress and arms that spoke of years swinging an axe. Her brown hair was scraped back in a severe bun, and her eyes held the hard practicality of a woman who'd fought the frontier and lived to tell about it. "You must be Wellen," she said, climbing down from the wagon with easy grace despite her size. "I'm Temperance Blackthorne, and these are my boys Jeremiah and Josiah." The children looked to be about 8 and 10, both tow-headed and serious-faced, watching everything with the wary alertness of prairie animals. They stayed close to their mother as she approached the cabin, clearly accustomed to being the only protection they could count on. "Mrs. Blackthorne," Cal acknowledged, stepping out onto his porch. "I appreciate you coming, but the situation has developed. Has it now?" Her voice carried a dangerous edge. "Grimsby's telegram said you needed a wife to help with a newborn. I assumed that need hadn't vanished overnight." Before Cal could respond, Serafina appeared in the doorway behind him, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in her arms. She'd changed into one of Cordelia's dresses, with Cal's awkward permission, and her dark hair was pinned up in a more respectable style, but her eyes still held their storm cloud intensity. Temperance took in the domestic scene with a single glance, her expression hardening. "I see. Well, that's plain enough. Come along, boys. We've wasted a trip. Wait." Cal stepped off the porch, surprising himself. "You came a long way. The least I can do is offer you a meal and a place to rest your horses." Temperance studied him for a long moment, then looked past him to Serafina. Something passed between the two women, not hostility exactly, but a mutual assessment, like gunfighters taking each other's measure. "I suppose we could use the rest," Temperance said finally. "Boys, unhitch the team and water them good." As the children moved to obey, the third rider crested the hill Delphine Courtright, traveling alone on a sturdy mare, a pack mule trailing behind. She was smaller than the other two women, but there was something indomitable about her that spoke of frontier toughness distilled to its essence. Her blonde hair was streaked with premature gray, and her blue eyes held a hardness that came from losing everything that mattered. "Lord have mercy," Serafina muttered under her breath. "This is about to get interesting." Delphine dismounted with the fluid motion of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than on foot. She took in the scene. Cal on his porch, Temperance by her wagon, Serafina holding the baby with a single comprehensive look. "Appears I'm late to the party," she said, her voice carrying a slight Kansas drawl. "I'm Delphine Courtright. Grimsby sent word about a rancher needing a wife and a baby needing a mother." "The baby's being cared for," Cal said, feeling increasingly like he'd stepped into a situation beyond his control. "By her, I assume?" Delphine nodded toward Serafina. "She looks young. How do you know she won't bolt at the first sign of hardship?" Seraphine's eyes flashed dangerously. "How do you know I haven't already faced more hardship than you can imagine?" "Ladies," Cal began, but Temperance cut him off. "This is foolish," she declared. "The man clearly needs all the help he can get. Ranch this size, baby to raise, winter coming on." One woman could barely manage it. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Cal found himself looking from one woman to another, Serafina with her fierce intelligence and Gabriel sleeping trustingly in her arms. Temperance with her obvious competence and two sons who could help with ranch work. Delphine with her tragic experience and desperate need for security. "What exactly are you proposing?" Delphine asked slowly. Temperance shrugged. "Practical arrangement. Share the work, share the benefits. Wouldn't be the first frontier household to make unconventional arrangements for survival." Cal felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Now see here, she's not wrong," Serafina said quietly, surprising everyone. "This land's too big for one person to work alone, especially with a baby. And Gabriel ... She looked down at the sleeping infant. "He deserves to have people who'll fight for him, protect him, help him grow strong." The four adults stood in awkward silence, each lost in their own thoughts, while Temperance's boys finished watering the horses and Gabriel slept on, oblivious to the complex negotiations surrounding his future. Finally, Cal cleared his throat. "Maybe we should all go inside and talk about this properly." Inside the cabin, With coffee brewing and Gabriel content in a makeshift cradle Cal had hastily constructed from a wooden crate, the conversation took on a surreal quality. 4 adults sat around his rough-hewn table, discussing an arrangement that would have scandalized polite society from here to New York. "Let me understand this correctly," Cal said, rubbing his temples where a headache was building. "You're all suggesting some kind of ... partnership." "Community marriage," Temperance corrected. "It's not unheard of in the territories. Survival trumps convention out here." Delphine leaned forward, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth. "I've got experience running a farm, managing livestock, preserving food for winter. Lost my husband's place to creditors, but I know the work. I can hunt, track, and handle myself in a fight," Temperance added. "My boys are good workers despite their age. We pull our own weight." Serafina had been quiet through most of the discussion, occasionally checking on Gabriel or refilling coffee cups. Now she spoke up. "I can read and write well enough to handle correspondence, keep books, teach the children. And I know herbs, healing, cooking. Which ones will kill you if you're not careful?" Cal stared at her. "That last part sounds ominous." Her smile was enigmatic. "Useful skill for a woman alone in the world." "This is insane," Cal muttered, but even as he said it, he could see the practical benefits. The ranch was indeed too big for one person to manage effectively, especially with winter approaching and a newborn to care for. 3 competent women could accomplish more than he ever could alone. What about ... He gestured vaguely, heat rising in his face again. "What about what?" Temperance asked bluntly. "Marital relations," he finally managed. The women exchanged glances. Serafina spoke first. "That would be between you and whichever of us you chose, if any. No one's proposing anything." "Unseemly. Speak for yourself," Delphine said dryly, earning surprised looks from the others. "I'm a widow, not a nun. And it's a cold country for a woman alone." "The point is," Temperance interjected, "those arrangements would be private matters between consenting adults. The partnership is about survival, not romance." Cal stood abruptly, needing to move, to think. He walked to the window and stared out at his land, hundreds of acres of good grazing, fertile soil, water rights that made him one of the more prosperous ranchers in the territory. All of it meaningless if he couldn't work it effectively. "There would have to be rules," he said finally. "Clear expectations." "Agreed." Serafina joined him at the window. "Equal say in major decisions affecting the household. Equal share in the profits from ranch operations. My boys get the same education and opportunities as Gabriel," Temperance added. "And protection," Delphine said quietly. "From creditors, from anyone who might try to take advantage. That's worth more than money to a woman who's lost everything once." Gabriel chose that moment to wake with a soft cry, and Serafina moved automatically to lift him from the cradle. Cal watched her gentle efficiency with the baby, the way she seemed to anticipate his needs before he could voice them. In just 3 days, she'd become essential to his son's survival. "What about the legal aspects?" he asked. "Marriage contracts, property rights?" "Only one of us could be your legal wife," Temperance pointed out. "The others would be partners in a business arrangement?" "With protections written into the agreement," Serafina said, settling into the rocking chair with Gabriel. "Property rights, inheritance provisions, what happens if someone wants to leave?" Cal turned to study the 3 women so different from each other, yet each offering something he desperately needed. Temperance with her practical competence and ready-made family. Delphine with her farming experience and tragic understanding of loss. Serafina with her education, her fierce protectiveness of Gabriel, and something indefinable that made his pulse quicken when she looked at him. "I need time to think about this," he said. "Of course." Serafina stood, Gabriel now contentedly feeding again. But don't take too long. Winter's coming, and we all need to know where we stand before the snows start flying. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin shutters and whistling through the gaps in the walls. Cal looked around his home so empty without Cordelia's presence, so quiet without her laughter and gentle conversation. These three women could fill that silence, bring life back to a place that felt more like a tomb than a home. But at what cost? And which arrangement would truly be best for Gabriel, for all of them? As if reading his thoughts, Gabriel let out a small, contented sigh against Seraphon's shoulder, and Cal felt his heart make a decision his head wasn't ready to acknowledge. That night, Cal couldn't sleep. He'd given up his bed to Delphine and made pallets on the floor for Temperance and her boys, while Seraphina insisted on staying in the rocking chair with Gabriel. The sound of the baby's peaceful breathing mixed with the soft snores of his unexpected houseguests, creating a domestic symphony that was both foreign and oddly comforting. He stepped outside into the crisp night air, needing space to think. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a sky brilliant with stars and a silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. This was his favorite time, the quiet hours when the world belonged only to him and the vast Nebraska sky. Can't sleep either? He turned to find Seraphina approaching, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, Gabriel bundled against her chest. Seemed safer to let you ladies have the indoors, he said. Less chance of accidentally offending anyone. She laughed softly. You're learning. Though I suspect Temperance would just tell you straight if you offended her, and Delphine's probably faced worse than anything you could dish out. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars. Gabriel stirred against Seraphon's shoulder, making small sounds of contentment. He's getting stronger, Cal observed. Yes, he's a fighter, like his father. She looked at Cal sideways. What was she like? Cordelia? Cal was quiet for so long Seraphina probably thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke. She was light. Everything about her was bright. Her laugh, her smile, the way she saw beauty in things I never noticed. She could make a meal out of nothing and convince you it was a feast. Made this place feel like more than just land and buildings. You loved her very much. More than I thought possible. He cleared his throat roughly, which is why this arrangement feels double quotes, like betrayal? Something like that. Seraphina adjusted Gabriel's position, her movements gentle and sure. Can I tell you something about my situation back in Oregon? Cal nodded. I was engaged to be married. A banker's son, respectable, well-connected, everything my father thought I needed. But he believed a woman's opinions were decorative at best, dangerous at worst. When I spoke up at a town meeting about the need for a school that would teach girls as well as boys, he was displeased. What did he do? Told me I needed to learn my place. Said once we were married, he'd cure me of my unwomanly ideas. Her voice hardened. The next day I found out he'd been visiting the saloon girls regularly. Figured marriage wouldn't change that particular habit. Cal felt a surge of anger on her behalf. So you left. I told him what I thought of him and his double standards. Loudly, in front of the entire congregation at Sunday service. Her smile was sharp. That's when the town council decided I might benefit from a change of scenery. Their loss, perhaps. But it brought me here to Gabriel. She looked down at the sleeping baby. Sometimes the worst things that happen to used lead to the best things. They were quiet again, but the silence felt different now, charged with possibility, with things unsaid but understood. Seraphina, Cal began, then stopped. Yes, if I were to choose just one woman to marry, instead of this partnership arrangement. She turned to face him fully, her storm gray eyes reflecting starlight. Are you asking me something, Calverton Welland? The sound of his full name on her lips sent something electric through his chest. Maybe I am. Then you should know that. I didn't come here looking for love. I came looking for survival, for a chance to be useful, to matter to someone. She paused, then added quietly, but I won't pretend I haven't noticed the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Heat rose in Cal's face. How do I look at you? Like you're seeing more than just a convenient solution to your problems. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used to wash Gabriel's blankets, the faint lavender scent of her hair. The question is, what are you prepared to do about it? Before Cal could answer, Gabriel chose. That moment to wake fully, his cry piercing the quiet night. Serafina immediately began soothing him, but he continued fussing, clearly hungry again. I should take him inside, she said, but Cal caught her arm gently. Wait. He looked into her eyes, seeing his own uncertainty reflected there. Serafina. Crane, would you consider becoming my wife? Not as a business arrangement or a practical solution, but because I think I'm falling in love with you and I can't imagine raising my son without you? Her breath caught. Cal. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But Gabriel already loves you, and I think... She silenced him by rising on her toes and kissing him, soft and quick and tasting of coffee and promise. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Gabriel's cries had subsided during their exchange, as if he somehow approved of the arrangement. Cal reached out to touch his son's cheek, then cupped Serafina's face in his other hand. What about Temperance and Delphine? We'll find another way to help them. But this, she gestured between them, including Gabriel, this feels like family. 2 weeks later, the small church in Millbrook was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread about the dramatic courtship, the rancher who'd nearly lost his newborn son, the 3 women who'd raced to save him, and the love story that had emerged from tragedy. Cal stood at the altar in his best suit, the same one he'd worn to marry Cordelia 3 years earlier. The thought should have brought pain, but instead he felt her presence as a blessing, as if she were giving her approval to this new beginning. Gabriel slept peacefully in the arms of Mrs. Henderson, the pastor's wife, who'd volunteered to mind him during the ceremony. The church doors opened, and Serafina walked down the aisle alone, her choice, since her father was dead and she wanted no man to give her away like property. She wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers from the prairie in her hair instead of a veil. She looked beautiful and strong and completely herself, and Cal felt his chest tighten with emotion. Behind her walked Temperance and Delphine, not as rivals but as witnesses to a love story they'd helped create. True to his word, Cal had found ways to help them both. Temperance had accepted his offer to manage the neighboring Garrett place, whose owner had died suddenly, leaving it in need of competent hands. With her boys to help and a percentage of the profits, she'd have security and independence. Delphine had surprised everyone by announcing her intention to open a boarding house in Millbrook, using the money Cal had given her as payment for her trouble and time. Town's growing, she'd said practically. New settlers need places to stay while they get established. And I'm tired of depending on the charity of men. When Serafina reached the altar, she handed her bouquet to Temperance and took Cal's hands in hers. Pastor Williams, a kind man who understood the harsh realities of frontier life, kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. Do you, Calverton, take Serafina to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish, in prosperity and adversity, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? I do. Cal's voice was steady, certain. And do you, Serafina, take Calverton to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and honor, though I suspect you'll skip the Yobe part, in prosperity and adversity, in sickness and in health, For as long as you both shall live? Seraphine's eyes sparkled with amusement at the pastor's small rebellion against convention. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Nebraska, I pronounce you husband and wife. Calverton, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was longer than propriety dictated, drawing cheers and applause from the assembled crowd. When they finally broke apart, Gabriel chose that moment to wake and voice his approval with a lusty cry that had the entire church laughing. The celebration that followed was held in the church hall, with the entire community contributing dishes and dancing to music provided by Old Pete's fiddle and young Tommy Morrison's harmonica. Cal and Seraphina danced their first dance as husband and wife to a waltz that had everyone misty-eyed, including Mordecai Grimsby, who was holding court near the punch bowl and claiming full credit for the match. I told you that boy needed a wife, he declared to anyone who would listen. Sometimes it takes a tragedy to show people what they really need. As the evening wound down, the new family prepared to return to their ranch, now truly a home. Cal lifted Gabriel from Mrs. Henderson's arms, marveling at how much the baby had grown in just 2 weeks. Seraphina stood beside him, her hand on his arm, and for the first time since Cordelia's death, he felt complete. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Welland?" he asked softly. "Home," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, I think I am." They rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Gabriel sleeping soundly between them, the future spreading out before them like the endless Nebraska sky. It hadn't been the love story any of them had expected, but perhaps that made it all the more precious, born from necessity, strengthened by adversity, and blessed with the promise of better days ahead. Behind them, Temperance drove her wagon toward her new responsibilities, while Delphine made plans for her boarding house. 3 women who had come west seeking security had found something more valuable, the knowledge that they were capable of creating their own destinies. And in his cradle that first night in his parents' bedroom, Gabriel Welland slept peacefully, surrounded by love and the quiet sounds of a ranch settling into contentment. The boy who had nearly died would grow up strong and healthy, raised by parents who had found each other through their devotion to him. Sometimes Grimsby had been right. Tragedy did show people what they really needed. And sometimes what they needed was exactly what they'd been afraid to hope for.